Today, I am going to share with you the story of Julia. It is one of the most delicate and painful stories I have ever had the honor of hearing. It's not about a sin she committed, but about an old wound, a poison, that, after lying dormant for decades, threatened to destroy the most sacred gift she had ever received, her own family. It's a story about how the shadows of the past can stretch out and try to erase the light of the future. I ask that you stay with me, because Julia's journey through fear is a powerful testimony, and in the end, I want to know what you would do in her place. Julia's voice was a thread, trembling and about to break. She was a 32-year-old woman who, to the world, seemed to have it all. A stable career, a happy marriage to a good man, and now the visible joy of a 7-month pregnancy. But behind that glow, there was a panic that was suffocating her. She came to talk about what the memories of a dark past were doing to her marriage and to the daughter who hadn't even been born yet. She began by describing a scene from the night before. She and her husband, Marcos, were on the couch watching a movie. Marcos, a man with a heart so good and transparent, was resting his head on her belly, talking to their daughter. They were words of pure love, a father's most beautiful anticipation. But for Julia, every word was a needle. She could feel her muscles tensing up. When Marcos placed his hand on her belly to feel a kick, she flinched instinctively, as if his hand were burning. Marcos was confused, but she lied, saying the baby had just moved in a strange way. The truth was that in that moment, Marcos's loving touch on her pregnant belly had merged with the terrible memories of other hands, her father's, that touched her in secret and whispered to her that this was our special affection. Her brain knew that Marcos was the opposite of her father. Marcos was safe. He was kindness. But her body, her nervous system, didn't know the difference. To her body, a man's hand promising affection to a child was an alarm bell, a code red for imminent danger. This dread wasn't entirely new. She remembered the beginning of her marriage. Marcos, in his kindness, took a long time to understand why she would sometimes shrink from an unexpected touch, or why, in their first years together, she needed complete darkness to feel safe. With immense patience and love, he learned to move around her invisible scars, and she learned to trust him. They had found a balance. But the pregnancy and the news that they were having a girl had reopened all the wounds with a violence that terrified her. She described how this phobia was growing as the pregnancy progressed. Marcos, in his excitement, bought a small manual on how to bathe a newborn. One night, he read it aloud to her, laughing about how complicated it seemed. And as he spoke, Julia felt a chill down her spine. The image of Marcos, a man, alone with their newborn daughter, vulnerable in the bathwater, triggered a silent panic attack. Her heart raced, her breath became short. She had to get up and go to the bathroom, faking morning sickness, just so she could breathe and try to calm the terror that was washing over her. She was pushing away the man she loved most, and he didn't understand why. He thought it was just the anxiety of pregnancy. He became more and more careful, more gentle, and his kindness, ironically, only made things worse because it reminded her of how perverse her father's kindness had been. She was caught in a trap set by the past. The ghost of her deceased father was more alive than ever, sitting between her and her husband, poisoning every moment of joy. She came to the confessional because she realized the silence that had protected her in childhood was now destroying her adult life. She needed help before she gave birth, not just to a daughter, but to a family tragedy. Her story was one of deep trauma. A trauma that manifested not in nightmares, but in this terrible transference of fear and revulsion from the abuser to the savior. My role there was not just to listen, but to help her find the tools of faith to dismantle this ticking time bomb. First, we talked about truth. Her secret was a poison she was drinking alone but it was making her marriage sick. She kept Marcos in the dark to protect him, but this protection was a form of isolation. I reminded her that marriage, at its core, is a union to become one flesh. But they couldn't be one if such a fundamental part of her soul was hidden in darkness. I told her that trusting her husband with her deepest truth was not a sign of weakness, but the greatest act of love and trust she could offer. Next, we talked about the image of God the Father. Julia's trauma with her earthly father had stained her ability to trust any father figure, including God. The Lord's Prayer was a difficult prayer for her. I spoke about the fatherhood of God, which is not the flawed fatherhood of men, but a fatherhood of pure protection and respect. Marcos, in his kindness, was a far more faithful reflection of this divine fatherhood than the ghost of her own father. She needed to ask God for the grace to heal her image of father, so she could see Marcos not through the filter of her trauma, but through the filter of grace. Finally, we talked about fear. Her fear was understandable, but it was paralyzing her. I told her that her father had stolen her childhood, and that she shouldn't let him steal her motherhood and her husband's fatherhood as well. Her daughter was not destined to repeat her story. On the contrary, she was her chance to rewrite it. Every gesture of genuine love that Marcos gave their daughter and that Julia allowed would be an act of exorcism, casting out her father's shadow from her home and her life. Julia left with a task, perhaps the most difficult of her life, to trust her husband's love enough to tell him the truth. And the outcome, what she chose, was an act of monumental courage. A few nights later, she sat down with Marcos. With trembling hands and a faltering voice, she opened Pandora's box. She told him everything, about the special affection, about the sworn secrets, about the fear that had shaped her. She exposed her ugliest wound to the man she loved, terrified that he would see her with disgust, that he would see her as damaged. Marcos, she later told me, listened in silence, tears streaming down his face. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment. Then he did something that changed everything. He didn't hug her, respecting her space. He knelt before her, took her hand, and with a broken voice said that he wasn't crying because of the story, but at the thought that she had carried it all alone for so long. He said she wasn't damaged, but that she was the strongest woman he knew, and that he didn't just want to be Beatrice's father, but the man who would help her heal, and that they would do it together. That was the true beginning of their marriage. They sought professional help. Marcos learned about trauma triggers, learned to be patient, to communicate every gesture. Julia, feeling safe and understood, began to disarm her body, to teach her nervous system that love could, in fact, be just love. When Beatrice was born, Marcos was the first to hold her, and Julia, watching the scene, felt no panic. For the first time, she felt peace. Their story leaves us with this question: is true love measured by the absence of problems, or by the courage to face them together? Is the cure for our deepest wounds in the silence that protects us, or in the truth that exposes us? Share your reflections in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that make you think about life, subscribe to the channel. Every week, I bring a new story from the confessional to you.